Lord is with you.
And also with you.
We continue listening to God speak to us from the Gospel in the tradition of Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus took Peter and James and John and went up a mountainside to pray. While he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were conversing with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions had been overcome by sleep, but becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As they were about to part from him, Peter said to Jesus, "It is good for us to be here. Let us build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But he didn't know what he was saying. And while he was still speaking, a cloud came over them and a shadow over them, and they became frightened as they entered into the cloud. Then from the cloud a voice was heard that said, "This is my chosen one, listen to him." After the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They fell silent, but did not at that time tell anyone what they had seen. And this, my brothers and sisters, is the gospel, the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
By the words of the gospel, may our sins be blotted out. Amen. Good evening.
Good evening, Father.
We welcome those of you who are with us all the time, and those of you who are with us for the first time. Good to have you with us, Jim. And Sister Pat's back. Welcome. As I read this gospel, I noticed when I got to a certain point in it, a couple of people smiled because one of my favorite lines is in the gospel. It is good for us to be. And this particular feast of the Transfiguration is a very special event in the life of the church, a special event, obviously, in the life of Jesus. It's mentioned in the 3 synoptic gospels, which means that if something is repeated over again and again, it's of importance, it's of value. So we hear Jesus taking, as I like to call them, the 3 musketeers, Peter and James and John. And he takes them to pray. I think some people feel that the only time they can pray is when they're in a place that we call the church. But I tell you, if we don't pray when we're on 95, we're in trouble. Praying, we talk about it all the time. Praying, I remember, as I like to say, muchos años pasado, many years ago, in the Baltimore Catechism, there was a question that said, "What is prayer?" And some of you were shaking your heads. Of course, you remember. Quote, "Prayer is the lifting up of our minds and hearts to God." And when we were all much younger, a lot of us, I think, felt that the only time we could pray is we were reading something. But praying has to become part of our DNA. It's got to become who and what we are. And when we pray and we allow God into our lives, wonderful things happen. More than we can ever recall. So we see Jesus, and the terminology is that he's transfigured. And no matter how hard we try, we can't be transfigured. Because Jesus, as the embodiment of God's presence on earth, have this tremendous privilege. We can't be transfigured, but we can be transformed into the image and likeness of God. This is something that all of us are called to. The transformation as we move along in our journey in this lifetime. And the final transformation comes when we're called into the presence of God face to face. To be transformed. And then we see Peter, the one who was the spokesperson and the one who betrayed 3 times. And he says, it is good for us to be here. Let us build 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. In the mind of the Jewish community at the time, being that they were traveling from place to place without a permanent home yet, they used that terminology of tents, because as they went from one place to another, they erected a tent to put the ark in. So this is the terminology that Peter uses. And Moses and Elijah, out of all the names in the Old Testament, in the Jewish Testament, Jewish scriptures, why these 2 names are mentioned. Many times in Jesus' preaching, we hear him say, I have come to fulfill the law and the prophets. He was telling the leaders of the temple, I'm not teaching anything new. I'm coming to fulfill and to teach what you aren't teaching. So Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. So these 2 symbols of the Jewish scriptures come together in the presence of Jesus. And how many times, I don't know if it's happened to you, but many times I hear maybe a little voice that talks when there's a certain decision to be made. Some people call it a guardian angel. Some people call it maybe a room with soft walls. But I do. And here we see this cloud, this fogginess that comes. And then when we welcome that presence of God, the cloud disappears. And we hear, every single one of us hears what Jesus heard when he was baptized. This is my beloved, listen to him. And we hear it again. This is my beloved, listen to him. So when we feel the presence of God and we can actually experience that closeness to God's presence, don't be afraid. Open yourselves to God's presence. Be people of prayer, and tremendous things will continue to happen. Pray for me as I pray for you. And may God bless us and keep us. May God's face shine upon us and give us peace.